This is a story you'll definitely want to hear to the very end. Chapter 1. The Gilded Cage. The porcelain chimed softly against the silver. The sound, meant to symbolize comfort and prosperity, had long become a harbinger of storms in Eleanor's mansion. Tonight's dinner was no exception. Eleanor sat at the head of the long, polished table, observing her daughters, Claire and Olivia. She had created them, sculpted them from her love, sleepless nights and endless sacrifices. She had built this empire for them, echelon designs, from the ground up, turning a modest tailor shop into a fashion house renowned across the country. And now, looking at their sharp, cold profiles, she saw only two magnificent but alien predators. "Mother, we think it's time for you to rest," Claire, the elder, began. Her voice, as always, was perfectly measured, businesslike, without a single note of warmth. She headed the company's finance department, and numbers interested her far more than her mother's pulse. "Your recent decisions at the company have been impulsive. The nostalgia collection didn't yield the expected profit." Eleanor pressed her lips together. The collection was dedicated to her youth. She had poured her soul into it. Her daughters called it senile sentimentality. "And then there's your health," chimed in Olivia, the younger, adjusting the diamond necklace at her throat, purchased, of course, with dividends from Echelon Designs. Olivia was in charge of PR and marketing, and her main project was herself. "You've become so forgetful. Last week, you asked me the same thing 3 times. We're worried." Worry, in their mouths, sounded like a threat. Every word was a prick, a tiny drop of poison. They hadn't seen her as a mother for a long time. They saw a depreciating asset, a resource to be written off and divided. Eleanor remembered carrying them in her arms, kissing their scraped knees, celebrating their first school successes. Where had it all gone? When did her gentle clay harden into this ruthless granite? She glanced around the dining room. Italian furniture, paintings on the walls, crystal reflecting the light. She had built them a palace, but she had raised 2 prisoners of their own greed within it. "Thank you for your concern, girls. I'm managing," she answered evenly, feeling a chill grow inside her. "We're not so sure," Claire cut in, setting down her fork. "And we can no longer risk the family business because of your condition. We've prepared some papers for your own good."
Olivia nodded in agreement, looking at her mother with a pity as fake as the pearls on her wrist. Eleanor looked into their eyes, empty, calculating, greedy. There was nothing in them but the reflection of the polished table and the anticipation of victory. A strange premonition had haunted her all evening. She felt like prey, the traps already set. Dinner ended in oppressive silence. After seeing her daughters out, Eleanor stood by the window for a long time, looking at the city lights. She didn't know what papers they had prepared, but she understood this was the beginning of the end. Or perhaps the beginning of a new, terrible war, one she, a loving mother, would have to wage against her own children. And in this war, she was utterly alone. Or so she thought until the next morning. Chapter 2. The Stab in the Back. The morning brought not relief, but a phone call that split Eleanor's world into before and after. The voice on the line belonged to Michael, their family lawyer, an old-school gentleman who had worked with her since the days Echelon Designs was tucked away in a basement workshop. "Eleanor, We need to meet urgently, and not at the office. Meet me at the literary cafe in an hour. This is confidential." His tone promised nothing good. The small, quiet cafe smelled of coffee and old books. Michael looked tired and older than his years. He ordered nothing, only placing a thick folder on the table in front of him. "Eleanor, I'm sorry to do this. I've known Claire and Olivia since they were babies, but what I've learned, my conscience won't let me stay silent," he began, looking her straight in the eye. Eleanor's heart stopped. Michael opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents that sent an icy chill down her spine. Medical reports from doctors Eleanor had never seen. Witness statements from family friends who colorfully described her progressing dementia, memory lapses, and erratic behavior. It was all a lie, an audacious, monstrous lie woven by her daughters. The crowning piece was a petition to the court. Claire and Olivia were demanding she be declared legally incompetent, appointing them as their guardians, and of course, guardians of all her assets. Eleanor stared at the neat lines of legal text, unable to believe her eyes. Her daughter's words from the night before about papers and concern took on their true, sinister meaning. They didn't just want to take her business. They wanted to erase her identity, lock her away, strip her of her voice, and turn her into a living mannequin while they divided her legacy. "They've been visiting these doctors behind your back," Michael continued quietly, "gathering evidence for months, paying people for the right words. According to their plan, the court will issue a ruling in a couple of weeks, and you won't even have time to react. They'll present it as if they're saving both you and the company from yourself."
Pain, as sharp as a knife, pierced Eleanor's chest. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a planned, cold-blooded murder of her soul, carried out by the hands of those to whom she had given that very soul. Her entire life, all her love, all her sacrifice, it was all trampled and discarded like useless trash. She remembered their faces at dinner last night, full of false sympathy, and she grew afraid of what she had raised. She sat in silence, staring out the window at the bustling pedestrians. There were no tears. Everything inside her had burned out, leaving behind only a cold, ringing emptiness. And then, in that void, something new began to form. Not grief, not despair, but a frigid, calm rage. They thought she was weak, a senile old woman. They thought she had already lost. Well, it was time to remind them what kind of steel the founder of Echelon Designs was forged from. "Michael," her voice was firm, sounding foreign even to her own ears. "Burn this. Officially, you know nothing. Now, tell me how to find the best estate lawyer in this city. And I need to make a phone call to a town I haven't called in 35 years. Chapter 3. Ghost of the Past. Eleanor sat in a simple but cozy cafe on the outskirts of the city, a place as far removed as possible from the glitz and glamour of her world. Across from her sat a man in his mid-30s. He had her eyes, the same deep gray color and a direct, slightly weary gaze. His hands, resting on the table, were the hands of a working man, strong, with healed scratches. His name was Daniel. He was her son. 35 years ago, a young Eleanor, full of ambition but penniless, had arrived in the big city to make her mark. She had a whirlwind romance with an artist, as poor and dreamy as she was. When she found out she was pregnant, he vanished, leaving only a note. In a world where being a single mother was a stigma, Eleanor made the most difficult decision of her life. She gave birth to a boy, and with a heavy heart, left him to be raised by a distant relative in a small provincial town, promising to help with money. She married a reliable but unloved man, gave birth to Claire and Olivia, and poured all her unspent love and pain into her work. She built an empire, but every new victory echoed in her heart with a dull ache for the one she had left behind. She faithfully sent money, but was afraid to meet him, afraid to see reproach in his eyes. Now, looking at him, she saw no reproach, only guarded curiosity. Daniel had grown into a modest and decent man. He had become a master carpenter with his own small workshop. He knew who his biological mother was, but had never tried to find her. "Why did you need me, after all these years?" he asked directly, without mincing words. There was no anger in his voice, only sincere bewilderment.
And Eleanor began to speak. It was her confession. She told him everything about her fear and loneliness back then, her loveless marriage, the birth of her daughters, about how she tried to buy their love with luxury and gifts only to raise two monsters. She spoke of the company she considered her third child and how her own daughters were trying to take everything from her, including her sanity. "They want to have me declared insane and take it all," she finished, and for the first time in days her voice held not steel but a tremor. Daniel was silent for a long time, processing what he had heard. He looked at this elegant, powerful, yet infinitely sad woman and tried, for the first time in his life, to grasp that this was his mother. He didn't feel a familial bond, but he felt a strange sense of empathy. His life was simple and honest. He earned his living with his hands and never chased wealth. The story of betrayal and inheritance battles seemed wild and surreal to him. "They're your daughters," he finally said. "How could they?" "I ask myself the same question," Eleanor replied with a bitter smile. "I've made many mistakes in my life, Daniel. The biggest was thinking that love could be bought with money. Now I want to fix at least one of them. I'm not asking you to love me or to forgive me. I've come to ask for your help, but not in the way you think. I don't need your strength. I need your name." She looked at him intently. The cold determination returned to her gaze. "I want you to come to the city with me for a few days. You won't have to do anything, just be present. Are you ready to see the world that could have been yours?" In his gray eyes, so much like her own, a complex mix of emotions was reflected. He saw before him not an all-powerful businesswoman, but a woman on the edge of a cliff, seeking not salvation, but justice. And he, who had never asked her for anything, suddenly realized he couldn't refuse. "Okay," he nodded. "I'll go." Chapter 4. The Confession and the Will. Michael's office felt more like the stage for the final act of a tragedy. The air was electric. Claire and Olivia sat with the expressions of victors, certain that their mother had finally broken and had invited them to sign her surrender. They cast condescending, almost pitying glances at her. Eleanor remained silent, staring at a single point. Seated next to her, slightly behind, was Daniel. His simple, unfamiliar face elicited only bewilderment and contempt from the sisters. "Another one of Mother's projects? Decided to get into charity in her old age?" Olivia managed to whisper to Claire.
"Well, let's begin," Michael said, clearing his throat and arranging documents on the table. "Eleanor has invited you here to announce her decision regarding the future of Echelon Designs and her estate." Claire smiled smugly. This was the moment of triumph. "But before we proceed to the documents," the lawyer continued,
Eleanor would like to make a statement. Eleanor slowly raised her head, her gaze, clear and sharp, locked onto her daughter's. All the feigned weakness and forgetfulness had vanished without a trace. Before them sat the same iron lady they had so feared and hated. "My darlings," she began softly, but every word struck like a blow. "I know about your plan, about the doctors, about the witness statements, about your court petition to have me declared incompetent." Claire's face turned to stone. Olivia's smile slid from her lips, replaced by fear. They exchanged shocked glances. "Mother, what are you talking about? We were just—" "Silence!" Eleanor's voice gained a metallic edge. "All my life I lived for you. I built this business so you could have everything. And you decided you had the right to throw me out like old furniture? You have accused me of madness, but the only madness here is your greed. It has consumed everything human in you." She paused, letting the words sink into the silence. "You thought you knew everything about me. You were wrong. I have a secret I've kept for 35 years. She turned and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Meet Daniel, my firstborn son, your older brother." If a bomb had gone off in the room, the effect would have been weaker. Claire shot up, knocking over a glass of water. Olivia stared at Daniel, then at her mother, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish on dry land. What, brother? You've lost your mind. He's a fraud." "No," Michael replied calmly. "All the documents, including the birth certificate and a recent DNA test confirming the relationship, are right here." He tapped a second folder. Eleanor stood up. She looked at the faces of her daughters, twisted with rage and shock, without a shadow of pity. "I didn't come here to fight you in court. I came to make a confession. I confess to my greatest mistake. I raised two selfish monsters. And I confess to my greatest sin. I abandoned my son. Today, I am rectifying both." She nodded to Michael. The lawyer picked up the main document. In accordance with Eleanor's last will, notarized this morning, her entire estate, including 100% of the shares in Echelon Designs, the mansion, bank accounts, and all other assets, upon her passing, shall be transferred to the sole ownership of her son, Daniel Roman. The silence exploded into screams. It was the end, not of negotiations, but of an entire family. Chapter 5. Ashes on the Ruins. 6 months passed. The empire of Echelon Designs had a new ruler. Daniel, who at first felt like an outsider in the gleaming corridors of the fashion house, turned out to be a surprisingly capable learner. He didn't have Claire's business acumen or Olivia's social polish, but he had something they had always lacked: honesty and respect for people. He didn't try to tear down what his mother had built. On the contrary, he brought a human touch to the cold, calculating world of Echelon Designs. His first move was to improve the production workshops, bettering the conditions for the seamstresses, the very people where it all began. He launched a program to support young designers from small towns, giving them the chance he never had. The business, against all predictions, didn't collapse. It just became different, more soulful and authentic. The sisters' fate was predictably tragic. Their attempts to challenge the will in court failed spectacularly. The evidence of their conspiracy against their mother, presented by Michael, made their case hopeless.
Stripped of their money and status, they instantly lost all their friends and influence. They found themselves in the very world they had despised, the world of ordinary people forced to count every penny. Claire, broken and embittered, moved into a small apartment on the city's fringe and blamed everyone but herself for her downfall. Olivia tried to cling to the remnants of her former luxury, but quickly fell into debt and dubious company. There had never been any sisterly love between them, and their shared hatred for their mother and newfound brother didn't unite them, but drove them further apart. They became strangers, meeting only to exchange mutual reproaches. Their alliance, built on greed, crumbled to dust as soon as the golden spring ran dry. Eleanor lived out her days in peace and quiet in a country home that Daniel bought for her, far from the city bustle. She didn't return to run the company. Her war was over. She had won, but the victory brought no resounding joy. It was a bitter, hard-won victory. She had lost 2 daughters, whom, despite everything, she had once loved. But she had found a son.
Her relationship with Daniel developed slowly, cautiously. They didn't try to make up for lost decades. They simply learned to be together. They walked in the autumn garden, drank tea on the porch, and talked about simple things. Eleanor watched as her son, her true heir, bore the weight of her empire with dignity and honor. And for the first time in years, she felt not anxiety for the future, but peace. One evening, staring at the fire in the hearth, Daniel asked her, "Do you have any regrets?" Eleanor thought for a long time, then looked at him with her clear, gray eyes, now free of pain. "I only regret that it took me a lifetime and a terrible betrayal to understand that a true inheritance isn't what you can write in a will. It's what you leave behind in another person's soul." Her home no longer chimed with the sound of fine porcelain, but it was finally filled with a silence in which one could truly breathe. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to the channel and you'll hear even more captivating tales.